here's the logo for Nomad Science. You can see it's got the cover of old Anti-Oedipus for those that are familiar. So, what is Nomad Science? Essentially it comes from these two books collectively known as Capitalism and Schizophrenia, Anti-Oedipus and Thousand Plateaus, written by these guys, two French philosophers. It's associated with 1968 and the kind of crisis in French academia, the general strike in May of that year, and this kind of the fallout of it. Specifically, Nomad Science comes from this book, and specifically the 12th plateau of 1,000 plateaus here. I draw some attention to the first axiom: the war machine is exterior to the state apparatus. This exteriority is first attested to in mythology, epic, drama, and games. In other words, it sets up like an explicit exteriority to the state logic, state cultural creation, division, and so forth. And it associates it directly with elements of culture, mythology, epic, drama, and games. In that connection, Nomad Science is explicitly a science of these four domains, and then explicitly exterior to the state in all of its sort of incarnations and types. And so where is that relevant? Well, a good example that I brought up yesterday is James C. Scott's Metis and Techne. Metis just means like craft or skill, and it evokes in his book the kind of natural sort of organic growth of different milieus, as opposed to those milieus that are specifically striated or kind of ordered for legibility practices, such as that of German forestry in the 19th century, that eventually led to soil depletion and so forth as a result of a lack of sufficient biodiversity. Yesterday I was sort of talking about helping disenfranchised folks have the techniques and abilities to sort of organize at a moment's notice, or to kind of build prosperity within their groups. I didn't mention bridging capital. Bridging capital is very important. Many sort of subgroups. One is I don't think I mentioned Jesus Hernandez, but he did a paper on Yonkers, and it talks about bridging capital, how black communities will tend to be actually very resilient already because by just a felt need of forming robust community bonds, but won't actually have access to capital. The capital access ends up as a result of bridging capital. So there is some sense that the idea of Nomad Science is to occupy these liminal spaces, or this smooth space that is able to traverse different striated milieus, and essentially embody this kind of bridging capital. But what does that involve? I mean, with sort of land legibility. This is a map of the United States, obviously, something that everybody is familiar with. Some people might be familiar with this, which is Colin Woodard's American Nations. Which are very different. Most notably, I think in this map is in front of the book is the impression that El Norte, has families and lineage lines that are on either side of the border, and the border becomes this kind of very arbitrary barrier dividing these two parts of land, even though there's one nation that traverses that essentially arbitrary state-derived border. Of course, these are more in line with the settlement patterns of the early colonists. This is the language distribution of Native American tribes throughout the American continent as well. So what I would draw attention to here is that these very much follow the land. This is sort of part of the material flows that permit certain groups of people, clusters of settlers, clusters of tribes to inhabit an area of land. It's a very high-dimensional kind of division. It's a very organically grown kind of division, and it's very much in contrast to this type of legibility. So what I would suggest usually in the kind of sort of scaling out versus scaling up versus scaling in. Scaling up is very much this kind of what James C. Scott calls authoritarian high modernism, whereas scaling out is very much this what Deleuze and Guattari call the development of supple segmentary or molecular kind of a clustering, as opposed to molar with this top-down type structure that fosters these sorts of small world. Somewhat sometimes scale free. I don't think social groups are technically scale free, but at least small world networks and the kind of social network analysis, or maybe intelligence augmentation via social network analysis that can go potentially into that. And I think that a lot of that is aided by having like a consciousness of the land and how that works. So I'd say, like, what is nomad science? The science of invention and maneuver. I think it comes from Gramsci, the distinction between wars of position, wars of maneuver. Wars of position are very much these legibility structures. Wars of maneuver are very much sort of like the more guerrilla kind of structures and approaches. Of course, this is a movement about like Renaissance engineering, not like revolution engineering. I'd argue that they're very similar, except one is one tries to topple, and the other adopts the frame that the good takes the place of the less good. And so so basically propagating creative practices is kind of like that kind of overarching kind of theme and mentality. Not so much revolutionary rabble rousing. Although it could have things that are somewhat adjacent to that, or very clearly bring better practices into the place of old sclerotic ones. So yeah, like the school, I've wanted to call the 12th plateau. I wonder if this is going to work here. I've never really done this before. Okay, yeah, like the and because it comes from the 12th plateau, I've thought of, because there's an interest in Hermeticism or occultism that sometimes comes adjacent to Deleuze and Guattari, and the rose imagery is very intentional, and then there's also like this nomad science aspect that I was talking about yesterday. And so in terms of the sort of the technical focus between like poetry, literature, art hacking on the one end, and high and low nomad science, which I'll maybe talk about later, on the other end. It'd be kind of cool to have these sorts of sub tribes within the school to just give people different tracks and stuff. I'm not really sure, and I haven't really worked it out too much yet, but it's interesting. In terms of low nomad science and high nomad science, like yesterday I was talking about like cranks and crackpots and how they're welcome, and there's like a sort of inventor science that doesn't necessarily move the science forward. There's another sense of nomad science that I didn't really get to that I think is just as important, which is like right now, an exemplar of it in my estimation is like Michael Levin. He had a very deep intuition about bioelectrics before the method of demonstration that would sort of bring it back into the field was there yet, and he was sort of eagerly awaiting the day that it would be, and then as soon as it was, sort of pounced on it. And so I'd be referring to the types of scientists that, because they sort of trawl the subterranean depths that form the intuition of the current paradigm, they're able to sort of see beyond the paradigm and bring things into a new paradigm. I'd almost go so far as to argue that on the side of high nomad science, like every scientist that actually breaks open the field or ushers in a new paradigm is a nomad scientist, like almost by definition. And so there's a distinction, we'll say, between like the scrappy kind of inventor nomad scientist and the I want to say established, or somebody that can coexist in academia, but has like this kind of almost like a renegade intuition that allows them to not only have the humility and the depth to inhabit say an academic position, a large lab like Michael Levin does, but also expand and go beyond paradigms. Obviously, it would be the dream, right, to have these two types of intellects, because they have a lot more in common than the striated structures that one might inhabit, like certain more cranky kind of part of the world, and another might inhabit a more academic part. But in this environment, they obviously can see their commonalities across striations, right? And another thing that I wanted to get into, and that I might today or tomorrow. I'll just go into it now, I guess, is what distinguishes like a crank from somebody that is a nomad scientist. I would argue that there's as regards several just the kind of normal emotional patterns that inhabit different communities. If somebody's got like a kind of almost a negative fandom or something like that, or Rick and Morty famously has some pretty reactive parts of its fandom. I'd say things like jilted ego and kind of delusions of grandeur, or not that delusions of mediocrity are any less bad than delusions of grandeur. I tend to say, but there's a certain level of humility, right? Like somebody that is able to go into academia and be a Michael Levin is obviously not is not absent the the intuition that it's necessary to humble oneself and surrender oneself to the rigor and the discipline of a field like as it stands within its current paradigm within academia. There was a paper called On Becoming a Nomad Scientist that was also sensitive to this, that it's not really just nomad science that you need, or just state science, as he calls it. Deleuze-Guattari call it royal science. You need something that's kind of in between both. Because if you don't have the royal science part, you lose some of the rigor, and if you don't have the nomad science part, you lose some of the paradigm shifting and the creativity. And it's possible for them to stagnate when they're apart from each other. So it is like kind of a wild claim to say like, oh, all really kind of like shooting star type scientists, Georgi Brzezicki is another one that comes to mind. They're nomad scientists, because they tend to basically, even if they're in the field, they tend to harbor these, heterodox or even just like kind of, heretical kind of ideas, because their intuition, their inquiry, right? So what distinguishes, we'll say, like royal sciences as such from like nomad science is the importance of inquiry. I mean, like I hearken very much to like Charles Sanders Peirce, don't block the path of inquiry. The question, like properly formulated, is so much a part of the answer that it takes the vast majority of it. So anyway, like this is going to be a long one. I probably should like spread these out or something like that. But as intake, I was mentioning that ultra learning is kind of the way in, and the reason why is because it's a strategy for acquiring skills and knowledge that is both self-directed and intense. It's this book here. It's got like sort of a outsmart the competition kind of mentality, and like sure, like on the back end in terms of building a business model or whatever for this stuff. I mean, that's kind of the idea, right? If this learning environment works correctly, then it will confer competitive advantages that will be noticeable. But as a designer on the inside or on the front end, I'm much more concerned with like making the intrinsic and sort of volitional aspect of such an environment reign supreme over extrinsic necessary like sort of values, at least in the design, right? Somebody might come into the environment thinking like, oh, after 3 months I'm going to go and I'm going to like jump into a new field because of the amount of stuff that I've crammed my brain with over that period of time with these other people and the projects that we've worked on. But while in the environment, it's kind of like part and parcel, I think, to my responsibility as a designer of this to co-designer, hopefully, to ensure that environment is sort of intrinsically motivated in the way that an enabling sort of a Montessori style space would be, regardless of kind of like the overarching. By which I mean like it's very when you see I mean there's this distinction between atelic, your sort of like non-goal oriented, and telic, behavior and activity, and there's some sort of mixture of the two. I want to say in an environment where you're self motivated, right? You want to be atelic in the sense that you're doing things for their own sake, but you want to be sort of telic in the sense that you're strategic in terms of how you spend your time where, and ultra learning kind of hews towards the telic. Whereas a Montessori environment might hew somewhat towards the atelic. So I think there's some sort of kind of environmental or contextual kind of a difference that I'm sort of seeking here.